30th and final day of my 30 days of React challenge, and today I played around with a few different React testing libraries and frameworks to try and gain a basic understanding of how I might test my React applications in the future. I really only touched on the bare basics of testing, but in doing so I kind of explored at a very basic level 3 different technologies: Jest, Enzyme, and React testing library. I've written a few different types of tests. I've done kind of shallow unit tests where only one component, where the test only runs on one component. I've also played with snapshots, mock tests, and integration tests where you're testing kind of a component tree or a parent-child relationship. So let's have a wee look at what I've created. A demo of the app I created to test. It's just a basic kind of shopping list app where you can pop in a little item or delete an item as so. But the more important thing is my tests, and I just ran my test a few moments ago, and as you can see we've got lots of green ticks, which is great when you're testing because it means that I have passed all of the tests that I have written for myself. So let's look over those tests. Okay, so here in my test.js app.test.js file, we import a few things we need, various libraries, etc. And then we also import all the different components that we want to test. How this app is set up is we have, just for reference as well, is we have our main app.js, which down here we render our list component. And within this list component, we are just rendering a bunch of list items. So it's like a parent with a child with multiple children. Okay, so back to our test. Okay, so the first test I've written is a very basic, simple test which just checks whether or not the app has crashed upon load or whether it's loaded successfully. With Jest, you use a few words to kind of structure your test. You have describe, where you generally will describe what it is exactly that you're testing, and then it, which you use to kind of describe what you want the outcome to be. So here we have describe. I'm describing, okay, it's my app component that I'm testing, and then I want to check that it renders without crashing. So all this test does is uses shallow, which instructs the test that we're just testing kind of one layer of the application, not the children as well. And if this test sees that the app component has rendered, it's going to pass. So very simple, about as basic as it gets when you come to it. Okay, so the next test section that I've written kind of concerns this count we have here. You'll notice here as we add items to the list, our count either goes up or down. And this count is all controlled in our main app.js file. It's just whenever we add an item here, we add the state.count by 1, and whenever we delete an item, we're just altering that state count to be -1. Okay, so what we do here is, and also, just to complicate things further, I've hard-coded 2 items in, so whenever this app launches for the first time, that item count is going to start at 2. So what this test section does is it just checks to make sure that when our app first loads, the count is at 2. So we'll see here we've got describe, unit tests, and our first one is it, count starts at 2. So what the test is doing is declaring a const wrapper, which is just our app component. And then what we're doing is we're using wrapper.find, this call, to look for p, the text, and return that as a variable called text. And then we're expecting that text that it finds within that app wrapper to equal total items 2, which it does, because on first load you'll see here total items 2. And the next one we have is just a little, I guess this is kind of the kind of test you'd use to kind of interact, to simulate user interaction, like someone jumping onto the page and clicking a button and making an action happen. So this, what we want for this to happen with this test is when on click of this button here, add to list, it's going to increment our count by 1. So again, we're just declaring variable our const wrapper as that app component, and then we're looking for the input here, And then we're actually simulating a change in that input and like giving it a value. So that would be the equivalent of someone jumping in here and manually typing in test. We're just doing that with a wee line of code here. And that's because I've made it that you can't actually add to the list unless there's an input. Otherwise, we could just go ahead and do click without having to simulate someone typing an item in. And then button.simulate, which is like as if a user's jumping in there and clicking the button. And then what it's saying is when we look in the wrapper after that's clicked, we should expect this text to equal 3, which we would, because if someone had jumped in here manually, clicked test and added it to list, this is going to equal total items 3. Okay, this video is already getting really long, so I'm not going to really describe the next two tests that I've written. One is a snapshot test, which basically just lets you kind of take a snapshot of a part of your app and make sure that nothing's changing, that stays the same as you keep developing, and also a mock test where you kind of define a sort of fake function to simulate a click or just to kind of check that functions are firing. And the final test I'm going to talk about is this last one here, which I have written not with Jest and Enzyme like the others, but with React testing library, and it is an integration test. So unlike the others that are unit tests and just testing kind of one layer of the application, this one is testing an interaction between two components. So my list component and my list item component. See here, the syntax is slightly different. For React testing library, we have describe, which is the same. So we have our list component integration test. But what we're testing for is we want to test that the list component renders the shopping list items with delete buttons. So how we do this is, since our list item here is actually passing props to the list, our list component is passing props to our list item, we kind of need to simulate data to be passed to that child component to be rendered. So that's what we're doing here. We render some dummy data. So I've created a couple of fake items, one which is potato, one which is cheese, each with a key, and then we arrange that data as props as the child component expects to receive it. So we've created an array here, items, which simulates kind of our state data as item 1 and item 2. And then what we're doing next is actually rendering our list component, as well as passing a few React testing library functions with it to use. And we're rendering that list item with the sort of dummy props that we've created. So first what we need to do is kind of assert what we need to find, therefore, to test. So what we want to do, basically, to check that this is rendering correctly, is say, okay, we need to check that there's two list items rendering that are called potato and cheese. So what I do is create a couple of variables based on this dummy data that we've already put in. So we can, this is going to be item1.name, which is going to be potato, and the next one is going to be cheese. Then what we're also doing is letting the test search through the page that we've rendered and actually count how many delete buttons we have. So it's getting all by text, delete, because obviously all of the buttons that we have rendered with this dummy data will say delete, and that length, which should equal 2, considering how much dummy data we put in. Then we will expect this first list item node to be defined as with the second. So what that's going to do is actually just search through our list component and make sure that both of these items as defined are showing up. And then we also want to check that our button count equals 2. And then that's it means this test here is kind of going through rendering these items, of simulating the rendering of these items, and then checking that everything that should be rendered has been rendered correctly. Okay, that's plenty, and that's my last ever video. Cool. Cheers, bye.